Hi, how are you doing? My name is Amit Naugiri and I'll be your instructor for this session. And in this lecture, we are going to see what is Microsoft Fabric and why are everybody so excited about this new service which Microsoft has launched. And they are saying that this is going to be a game changer in the world of data engineering and analytics. Which is why almost everybody on the internet is talking about Microsoft Fabric. They're curious about Microsoft Fabric, what are its offerings, and how is it different than all the other services that Microsoft has offering, like in Microsoft Azure, Power BI, and all that stuff. So this is an introductory session in which we are going to see the building blocks of Microsoft Fabric, the high level architecture as well. Okay, so what you see on the screen is the best image that I found on the internet that very well describes what is Microsoft Fabric. With a single image, I think I could explain you what is Microsoft Fabric. Okay, so let's deep dive. Let's start. Um, so Microsoft Fabric is nothing but it's a umbrella suite of multiple products. Some of them already existing, some of them are new products, right? So it's not a brand new service that Microsoft has launched. Microsoft, I would say, has repackaged their existing service into a single service called as Microsoft Fabric. And of course, they've made a lot of changes to those pre-existing service as well, and there are some of new service as well. The main changes that they have made is that they have simplified these services. They've simplified the user interface. They've hidden the complexity of all the services that was earlier present in Microsoft Azure, and they've just simplified everything. Okay, so if you see in this image at the top, you see Synapse Data Warehousing, Synapse Data Engineering, Data Factory, Synapse Data Science, Synapse Real-Time Analytics, and Power BI. So with just one service, Microsoft Fabric, you get all these six services all included in just one service. You don't have to pay anything extra for any of these services. It all comes as a package deal with Microsoft Fabric, right? So with this, what they've done is that they've eliminated the pain of creating multiple services, connecting those services to each other, handling the security part of that services and all that stuff, right? Because if you would have to create a data engineering solution on Azure platform, for example, then you would have to create a data factory service, a Synapse Analytics service, probably a data science service, and also a Power BI and all that stuff, right? And then, of course, connecting this all together and all that stuff. And all of that comes with different pricing as well. But over here, they've just simplified everything. So when you get a subscription of Fabric, when you buy a subscription, or if you do a trial account, you get all this six services included in it, which is why I was saying at the beginning, Fabric is nothing but an umbrella suite of multiple products, multiple Microsoft products, all clubbed into a single service, right? So let's talk briefly about each of this service. Synapse Data Warehousing is something that you already had in the Synapse Analytics part in Azure. Like for example, in Synapse Analytics, you had something called as a dedicated SQL pool, which was nothing but a data warehousing setup point, right? So they picked up data warehousing from Synapse, although it's a little different over here compared to what you have in your Azure Synapse, and I'll explain you when we deep dive into these services later, right? So that's from data warehousing that they've picked up from Synapse. Then you have Synapse Data Engineering. This is your data lakehouse. This is your lakehouse implementation, Delta Lakehouse, we should say, because all the tables that you store over here are based on Spark pools. So you have to create a Spark pool for that, and just write notebooks to modify the data, transform the data that you store, and also you can use pipelines as well for that. But Synapse Data Engineering is basically your Delta Lakehouse. And everybody is talking about Delta Lakehouse as well in the market right now, especially for big data workloads, right? So what Microsoft did is that creating a dedicated product as Synapse Data Engineering for your Lakehouse implementation. Okay. Next is Data Factory. Data Factory is your typical ETL service, which you anyways had in your Azure environment. That's Azure Data Factory. Over here, you get the same Data Factory with some changes to it. Like some of the building blocks over there, like for example, you had link services, data sets in your Azure Data Factory environment. Over here, they've eliminated that step. So there is no link service, there is no data sets over here, right? So they've simplified the factory service a lot. Also, I believe Data Factory is a little scaled down version, which you'll see in Fabric. And I'm hoping and assuming that Microsoft is going to add more power into it, add more meat into this Data Factory service by giving more components, more activities, which is present in the Azure Data Factory service, but I think they're going to add more services, more features to your Fabric Data Factory, right? Next is your data science. Now, this is another a new service that Microsoft created for all the data science, for all the data scientists, for them to model your data, for them to train the model, sorry, create a model, and then train the model and just predict all the stuff, right? So that's the Synapse data science, especially for data scientist people. Then you have Synapse real-time analytics. This is nothing but your Custo database, also called as KQL query. This is something that you had in your stream analytics. So they've changed a lot of user interface for this, and they've created this Synapse real-time analytics for your real-time streaming of data. And then, of course, you had Power BI, right? Power BI is the same old service that you have, which is also clubbed into it. So what they've done basically is that a one-stop shop for all your data engineering, data science related requirements. You don't need any other service. Just have a Microsoft Fabric subscription, and then you have a data warehousing solution. You have a Lakehouse implementation for your Spark-based workloads. You have ETL tool as Data Factory. You have data science service dedicated for data scientists, for machine learning algorithms, for predictive analytics. Then you have real-time analytics for real-time streaming of data, and of course you have Power BI to visualize all this data. So with just a single service, as Fabric, you can create end-to-end data engineering workloads, end-to-end data engineering platforms you can build with the help of just one service, Fabric, which is why I believe it is going to be the game changer in the data analytics world, and which is why everybody is so excited about it. Okay. All right. So these are the six services that you get. Of course, all of them are in preview state right now. So Microsoft is going to keep updating these services like very frequently until it becomes GA, and even after becoming general availability, Microsoft, I'm sure, is going to keep updating this particular service. I'm not sure about the future of their corresponding Azure services. That's something only time will tell, or we will have to wait for Microsoft to hear back from them about what are they going to do with their Azure service. I'm more curious to know what are they going to do with their Azure Data Factory or Azure Synapse Analytics. I believe they're still going to be there for some time. They're not going to retire them because they have their own purpose, and there are a lot of companies who've already built large scale architectures on those services. But of course, you can migrate some of those to Fabric as well. Okay. Um, After covering the services, this then you have a compute layer. Basically, at the top of your Fabric, you have a serverless compute layer. Basically, you have TSQL interface, you have Spark interface. So for data warehousing, you have a TSQL, your typical TSQL interface. For Synapse data engineering, you have a Spark interface. For real-time analytics, you have KQL, which is a query language for real-time analytics, and for Power BI, you have analysis services as your compute layer built in over there, right? And the heart and the soul of this fabric is one lake. Okay. Now with one lake, what they've done is that all the data that you create in this service while using these services like data warehousing, data engineering, data science, and all those services, whatever it, even Power BI for that example, whatever service that you're using, all the data of that service gets stored in one lake. And one lake is nothing but your data lake. It's your same Azure Data Lake account, but it's a common data lake account for all the different services. So you do not have to create multiple data lake storage accounts for warehousing, to store the data for data warehousing, for let's say Power BI. If you're creating a data set, you don't have to create a separate data lake storage account. Everything is going to be stored in one lake. Okay. And one lake, you could call it as an abstraction built on top of your data lake storage account. Of course, there is one security implemented over it. And another best part is all the data that gets stored in one lake, it is going to be stored in your Delta format. It is in a Delta Parquet format. So it's standard format across all the services. Whatever service you use, the data is always going to be get stored in a Delta Parquet format. I think that's Microsoft's strategy to move to Delta format, because Delta format is a very powerful way of storing data, very optimized way using Parquet format. That's the optimal way to store the data. And using Delta tables, you can store large amount of data, because of course one lake is nothing but a data lake account, and a data lake storage account is nothing but you can store limitless data, or petabytes, zettabytes level of data you could store in your data lake account. And having the power of Delta tables, which basically gives you asset transactions, which gives you power to update the data stored in your data lake account, right? So with that power of Delta tables, I think this is a very, very powerful platform that they've created. So if you see the warehouse data gets stored in the Delta Parquet format. Lakehouse data, of course, it by default anyways gets stored in the Delta Parquet format. The Custo database, the Power BI data set, everything gets stored in a Delta Parquet format, right? So that's the most optimal way of storing data. And with that, you could store limitless data. You can store petabytes, zettabytes of data, right? So basically, you can create a big data analytics on top of one link. Okay. And the best part is it's all internal. So if you want to, let's say you create some data warehousing tables, and let's say you want to use it in Power BI, or you want to use it in, let's say, data engineering, it's all internal, because all of them are sharing the same one link it is sharing. So it is just stored in a different folder structure or different path, but it becomes all internal for all the services to share the data, right? That's why it is very useful, I believe, because sharing of the data across multiple services is very easy. You don't have to create any new connection and all that stuff, and or handle security, because it is all handled in one link, because it is all internal to all the service, right? And the other benefit is that you can also get data outside your one link. For example, you have some data stored in Amazon S3 bucket, right? You can bring that data into one link as well. I mean, not copy the data literally, but there's something called as shortcuts which you could create. So, which is nothing but a link to your original data, wherever it is. Currently, it only supports a link to a Azure Data Lake account and a link to your Amazon S3 bucket, but in future, I'm sure Microsoft is going to add more connectors or more links as well. But if you have some data which is already sitting in your Amazon S3 bucket, which is already sitting in your Azure Data Lake account, you can just create a link to that data. And now that data also can be seamlessly accessed by all these different services. That's the beauty of it, that not just this internal data, the data of this warehousing, data engineering, and all this data becomes accessible, but also external data stored in data lake and Amazon S3 bucket, that also becomes accessible to all these different services, right? With the help of shortcuts. We'll cover shortcuts when we talk about especially data engineering section. That's when we'll see how do we create shortcuts and all that stuff. But that's why one lake is a revolutionary thing, I think, in the data engineering world and all that stuff, right? All right. So just we wanted to give you a quick overview about what is Fabric and its underlying architecture, and the major building blocks of Fabric. And then, of course, in the next session, we're going to deep dive into most of these services. How do you create this service and all that stuff, right? All right. Thank you so much for watching this session, and see you in the next one. Thank you. Bye bye.